Okay, welcome ladies, gentlemen, and everything in between. My name is Jared, and we are now live with Sverok TV. And today, I'm very, very thankful for Sverok TV for inviting me back to actually paint up some Mega Gargants for you, which are one of the new factions from Warhammer Age of Sigmar under the army title Sons of Behemat. So as you can see here on our top right corner, we have our War Stomper Mega Gargant, which I can swap over to just now. There we are. So we have our huge War Stomper Mega Gargant. So the way that the army actually functions, you can take 1 to 3 of these new big models, which are amazing sculpts. These things are gorgeous. I had a lot of fun painting the skin tone off stream for this. And then we can run 3 to 9 of the smaller guys, which, as we can see here with the size comparison, are nearly double in size. So, I think the way that the stream is going to work today is I'm going to try my absolute best to just get as much done on this as we can. Okay, so today we're going to be starting off with how we're going to start doing the Achalian Shell going over the belly. The Achalian Shell is actually a creature from another Warhammer Age of Sigmar army called the Idoneth Deepkin. And basically you need to imagine a giant, brightly coloured turtle. That's effectively what it is. So we're going to be trying to do this in a nice deep red colour. So what I'm thinking is that we're going to go over and do all the internal cracks first, and we're going to do that with a lighter colour, and then come over and do the panels with a dark colour, and then bring it back up. So what I'm actually thinking is we're going to be starting off with a bright white colour, and then we're going to shade that in shortly afterwards with a contrast paint. Most likely I'm considering Flesh Tearers Red or Blood Angels, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So we'll start off by painting all of the cracks with Vallejo Game Colour Arctic White. And just off of screen, just here, we actually have my wet palette. So for those of you that don't know, a wet palette is a painter's godsend, which is basically just a sponge covered in water with a piece of greaseproof paper over the top of it. And what this is going to do is that's going to allow us to keep our paints nice and fresh through the entire process and make our paints last longer as well. So another thing that we're going to do, we're going to water down our Arctic White with Vallejo, sorry, not with Vallejo, with Citadel Larmian Medium. And I've decanted this into a small dropper bottle for ease of access, just so we don't have too many issues. And we get this down into a nice thin consistency because we only need to drop in a couple of the under highlights, shall we say. So again, we're just going to follow those cracks, nice and simple. And we're only going to be painting in those recesses that we can find along the Achalian Shell. We don't have to be too neat here as well. We just want to make sure that we don't go over any of the skin tone that we've put so much work into. So we actually have a nice clean colour going on. Make sure that you're going to look around this miniature and make sure that we're not missing any. So this miniature, when fully assembled, has quite a lot of nooks and crannies that we're going to have to go in and find. So we're going to go in with Corn Red, once again decanted into a dropper bottle for ease of access. I'm going to go over all of the outer panels on this. Make sure you've mixed Corn Red quite well. Corn Red has a tendency to split very, very easily. And when Corn Red splits, it turns into a dark purple colour, which is of course what we don't want to do. My Corn Red is already pre-thinned, so I don't need to do a 1-to-1. But if you're going to try and do an Achalian Shell at home, starting off with a nice dark red, make sure that you thin it down 1-to-1 with Larmian Medium or an appropriate thinner. Okay, so now that we've got our Corn Red down over the Achalian Shell and over the Coronate Shield, we're going to move on to our next colour, which is actually going to be a contrast paint called Blood Angels Red. We're actually going to be thinning this down 1-to-1 with Larmian Medium, not Contrast Medium. And then we're going to be putting it in all of those white cracks that you can see here. The reason being is just so we have a nice slightly lighter red that you can view in those cracks going along his shell here. So then it gives us a little bit of a, ironically, contrast to go with. So, remember, shake your paints extremely well. And then we take our Larmian Medium, thin it down 1-to-1, and we're going to start putting it in just like this. Doesn't matter too much if this goes onto the Corn Red at all, because we're going to be shading all of the Corn Red after this anyway. Okay, so now that we've applied our contrast paint over all of the cracks, you can just about see that nice lighter color coming through. So next we're going to be applying Mephiston Red over all of the panels in a slightly glaze-like consistency. So again, get a good amount on your wet palette, and this time we're going to do in a 2-to-1 ratio. So when I say 2-to-1, that refers to how many parts. So we're going to take 2 parts of Lamy and Medium and 1 part of Mephiston Red. So we have it almost like a very nice thin glaze. Almost like the consistency of milk, but a little bit thinner. Okay, so we're going to be very, very careful to apply this over the big flat areas, and we're going to try our absolute best not to have this on the edges, so we still get that nice dark color. Okay, so now that we have our coat of Wazdaka Red of Mephiston Red going over the shells, because we skipped over that, we're now going to be starting with our next color, which is actually going to be Evil Sunz Scarlet. This is actually quite a strong pigment, and we're going to get progressively stronger as we go. So we want to be thinning down the ratio of the glaze as we go. And we want to make sure that we're not taking too much paint, too much medium. So with this, I'm still going to go 2 parts medium to 1 part paint. And we're going to be doing the same method again. We're going to be going over the shells a little bit further in this time. So we still keep that nice, rich, dark red that we've been working on. But now we've got a nice little highlight to the panel. I'm going to do that all the way over. Okay, so we've got our next layer fully dried. So we're going to start moving on to our even brighter tones now. So we're going to go on to Troll Slayer Orange. This, again, an incredibly strong pigment. So we want to take this as thin as we can physically get it, as to not completely ruin our gradient. So we're going to take 1 part Troll Slayer Orange to 3 parts medium. Again, just not going over our previously done work. This will require 2 thin coats this time, as we've thinned down the pigment just enough. So we need to have this coat fully dry before we move on to the next shade. Okay, so our Troll Slayer Orange layer is done, and I kind of like the sporadic kind of looking that I got with the 1 thin coat. So we're going to move straight on to our Fire Dragon Bright, and we're going to do the exact same thing. However, we're going to mix a little bit of the previous Troll Slayer Orange in with this method. So the reason for that is because then we can get a nice saturated skin color between the 2 coats. And we're going to go over, once again, making sure not to go over any of the previous layers that we've done, because we want to try and keep those bright colors to the center of each panel. Now these coats are getting thinner, our drying time is going to go down as well, so we're going to be able to move on to our next coat quite shortly. Okay, so that is our layer of Fire Dragon Bright done. So we're going to move on to our final color for our Achelian shell, which is going to be an extremely thin coat of Uriel Yellow. Reason for this being is it's just going to give another depth of color, but we do not want this too thick. We are going to do this again by mixing a little bit of our yellow with a little bit of our Fire Dragon Bright mixture that we've done, and then bring it all together with our Lamy and Medium. So again, we're going to be operating on a 3-to-1 glaze consistency. Again, it's always good to have a tester just nearby, so I quite like to use the back of my thumbnail just here. Once again, just keeping to our inner edges. And when you're working on points like we've just got here on the side, we've got this little hook coming off. We're going to start by applying towards the inner edge of our shell, and we're going to move the pigment to the outside. So that allows us to have a nice thin coat towards our center, and then towards the outer we actually have a really nice bright yellow color to work with. Okay, so moving on to our next step, we're actually going to be going on to the giant club of our War Stomper, which is primarily just a big rotten tree trunk with a stone shoved in the end of it, wrapped in metallic chain and wrapped in some cord or rope or something of that nature. So we're going to start with our wood tone, and our wood tone we're going to take Dryad Bark as a really nice base color for this. Once again, we're going to thin it down 1-to-1 and hope that it doesn't take 2 coats, but it might need 2 coats, so we're going to have a see. We're also going to be swapping over to a larger brush here, so I'm actually going to be using a Army Painter large dry brush. Don't worry about the name, it's fine. The reason for this is because it's got a really nice angle to it, so it's not just a flat brush, it's actually very, very nice for getting on base colors it actually is a similar structure to Citadel's own large base brush. So we're going to get one nice even coat over this and see how we go, and hopefully we don't need a second coat. But we want to make sure we get into all of those crevices that we can and get the whole thing nice and uniform for our wood colors. Okay, so we have our first coat of dried bark down, and luckily it went on very well because I decided to use a black undercoat, so I only needed one coat. However, what we're going to do next is we're actually going to forget about the wood for just a moment, and we're going to focus on the stone that we have here on the end. I've seen some people already painting this up with things like quartz colors or warp stone for Skaven or things like that, or even realm stones if you can find accurate images of those online. I'm going to paint them up as a standard hunk of rock that he's just picked up and he's just slammed in the tree trunk. So we're going to be starting off with our base color for it, which is going to be Mechanica Standard Grey, and I've switched out to a smaller brush, specifically the Army Painter Regiment brush. And we're going to get one nice, even, consistent coat all the way across this thing. And then we're going to start applying our coat nice and evenly all over, trying our best to avoid the chains and the rope that's over here because we don't want to muddy up the details too much and make them unreasonable. So we're going to get our nice thin coat done, and then we'll move on to our next step. Okay, so now that we've got our Mechanica Standard Grey, put all of our stonework, we're now going to move on to the shading for it. The reason for doing the grey before we carry on with the wood is to make sure that we can fix any small mistakes we do on the dryad bark without messing up any work we do on the wood. The wood is a little bit more sensitive to paint as it's going to be a little bit brighter colors, so we really don't want to muddy up that paint. So for our shades, we're going to take 3 shade colors in total. We're going to take Null Noil, Agrax Earthshade, and a Athonian Camo Shade. And the way that we're going to apply this is in a very, very sporadic method. So we're going to apply a little bit of Null Noil here, a little bit of Agrax here, a little bit of Athonian Camo Shade here. The reason for the Athonian Camo Shade is where you'd think that water would settle. So like along the edges where the tree meets the stone. There we're going to apply our green, and that's going to give us a very, very nice sort of realistic-ish looking appearance. So we're going to take this straight out of the pot. We're not going to thin it down because we're going to dry brush afterwards anyway. We just want these colors nice and strong all over. And we want to make sure that we get all those little nooks and crannies, because this stone actually goes down about 1/3 of the trunk. And we'll do it side by side. So once we've got the Null Noil on, we'll go in with a bit of Agrax. Okay, so this is going to take a little bit of time just to dry as it's shade paints, and we're applying them quite thickly in multiple layers. So we want to make sure that we give this enough time to dry. Okay, so whilst we're waiting for our shades to dry on our stone, we can go back to our wood colors. And for this, we're going to be using a method called dry brushing. And what that involves is we're going to take slightly lighter tones than what we use. So we use dryad bark as our base. So we're going to take Gorthor Brown on our Citadel dry brush, get just a little bit on the end of our brush, work it in all the bristles, and we're going to wipe off about 90% from that brush. So it's barely leaving a mark. Now what we're going to do is we're going to very, very gently, in a circular motion, go over all the wood. This will be subtle at first, so you can build up layers, and if you feel like it's too soft, just apply a little bit more, then we can swap out. Okay, so moving on to all of the cloth colors, what I'm actually thinking is that I'm going to keep this relatively uniform, and I'm going to be doing that with Vallejo Game Color Khaki color, which is 72061. And I think this actually has a really, really nice soft color to it. And also, being from Vallejo, applies very nice and very smooth. I'd say try your best to apply 2 thin coats of this and get it uniform over all of the leather pieces, and make sure not to miss on the underside of the arms and on the legs down here. Okay, so we've now got all of the cloth colors painted over in our khaki. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over all of this with a shade, and you can use whatever shade you want here. Personally, I want a nice dirty look, and I would normally use Agrax Earthshade. However, Agrax Earthshade over these very large flat surfaces can sometimes leave a bit of a patchy look. So one thing that I'm going to use instead is actually a contrast paint called Guillemard's Flesh, and I'm going to thin this down 1 to 1, and then I'm going to apply a smooth coat over all of the surfaces. Start applying that liberally over everything, and we're going to get a very nice dark aged look to our cloth. You might want to apply multiple coats of this. Maybe the next coat might be a little bit darker and you want that in the recesses and up in the corners, just to apply a little bit of a shadow to everything. But that's entirely painter's choice. Personally, I want things dirty, and I'm going to cover this with aging pigments later on at home. So when I finish this off at home, I'm also going to be putting on raw painting pigments of 3 different shades to make it look actually dirty, not just stained. Okay, so whilst we've had the shade drying over the club, we've then moved on and done some other things like getting the cloth work done, but now the club is fully dry. We're going to go back and do another dry brush. So we originally did Dryad Bark, Gorthor Brown dry brush, and then we shaded it all down. Now we're going to go back and redo another dry brush of Gorthor Brown, just to bring it back up. And then we're going to do a final dry brush of Steel Legion Drab. This applies quite a nice, softer wooden tone. And then we're going to take a nice, soft approach in a circular motion over all of the wood. The reason for the circular motion is because then it leaves less brush strokes as you're going. Okay, so now that we have our dry brush down of Gorthor Brown, we're then going to move on to Steel Legion Drab. And this one we're going to be applying a little bit more selectively. So on this, we're only going to be going for those tippy top highlights. So we're going to go just where the wood hits the very, very surface. And we don't want to be doing this all over. Reason for this is because we want to keep everything like down here in between the chords. We want to have that a very nice, dark, deep wood color. But everything like out here where we've got that big extended circular bit, the knot of the tree, we want to have that nice and bright so it catches the eye as you glance over this model. So just be a little bit selective, a little bit patient, and choose where you're going to have this color, where it's going to look the most natural. And if we do decide to go a little bit too much on this, you can always go back with Gorthor Brown and reapply that, and then that'll darken up that section a little bit again. Okay, so now that we've got our Steel Legion Drab done, we're now going to move over to the stone colors here. So with the stone, normally I would be using Citadel dry brushes here. Well, sorry, dry brush paint, things like Dawnstone and Tyrant Skull. Sadly, I've forgotten those, so instead we're going to be using a slight alternative. So a good alternative to Dawnstone or what's the other stone called? Or Dawnstone, whatever, is actually Stonewall Grey from Vallejo. This is a really nice, softer grey tone. So with this, we're going to make sure that we do this very, very light. We still want to get it all in the bristles. Get 99% of this paint off of the brush. Use your thumb as a tester or something. And once again, we're going to go extremely lightly just over the stone, just being sure to catch those raised details. Okay, so now that we've got our initial dry brush done over the stone, we're now going to go to an even lighter tone. Again, I would normally use something like Tyrant Skull here, something like a nice bright cream. However, I'm going to instead use a Rakarth Flesh base color. Now, as this isn't a dry brush, we want to make sure, as this isn't a dry brush paint, we want to make sure that we use this very, very sparingly on our brush. I'm going to get most of it off again, and then we're going to do one final little dry brush going over, being extremely selective about how this goes on. We only want the tippy top peaks of this stone. We want to make sure that this only goes where there's going to be a lot of damage on the stone and where it's going to be, let's say, hitting enemies and things like that. So just take your time, be very careful not to overdo it, and just hit those corners to get a nice even stone tone. Okay, and finally I want to bring this stone up just a little bit more. So again, we're going to take another base color, or rather a layer color from Citadel here, and we're going to go with Pallid Witch Flesh. So this is an almost white color. So this we do not need a lot at all, and the goal here is to only apply it on one or two very select places. And once again, this will be the tippy top edges on where you're going to be hitting a lot with this stone. So we want to get it just on the raised surfaces, just catching that top detail. And this is going to give us a nice three-tone effect to our stone. So we've got the darker grey into the lighter grey into the whiter tones, and it's going to look nice and natural-ish looking. Okay, so now we've got our stone texture done. It is now just time for the final details. So we're going to be getting the metals done on our chains, and we've got a couple of blades sticking out the side of this wood as well. And we're also going to get all of the cords done here for the rope. So the rope, you can use whatever color you want. Personally, I kind of prefer like a Zandri dust or a Karak stone style, which is going to be a very dark beigey tone. And then I'll follow that up with a nice Nuln Oil or something similar, which is going to allow us to get a nice, somewhat natural hemp rope style looking. And for the metallics, we're going to be going with Vallejo gunmetal. Citadel lead belcher works perfectly here as well. I personally prefer gunmetal as it goes on a little bit smoother. And then we'll be doing the same thing again, and we'll be applying Nuln Oil to that over the top of it. So let's get to it. Okay, so we've got the base color for our silvers on. Now we need our Zandri dust, and we're going to put that over all of the cables, all of the rope rather. I've already thinned this down, but use a 1-to-1 ratio. Okay, so when doing this, make sure to take a lot of care, a lot of precision, that we don't go over any of the wood textures that we've just done. Again, we're going to age it down quite a bit, so it's fine if it's not the perfect coverage, but we still want to cause as little fix-up as we can. Okay, so now that we have our cords done in Zandri dust and we have our metallics on the blades and the chain done in gunmetal or lead belcher, we're going to move to shades. So I'm actually going to be using another contrast paint here to shade, which is going to go over the metals. Reason being is Basilicanum Grey is a little bit darker, or rather it dries darker than Nuln Oil. So when we actually apply this, it's going to leave shiny little bits on the edges, which is going to give us enough time, or rather, it's going to give us enough pre-done work that we don't have to worry too much about edge highlighting these silvers. They're going to be naturally edge highlighted from the Basilicanum Grey that we're using, as it won't stick to the edges. The shade that we're going to be using on the chains, on the cord, is going to be Agrax Earth Shade. If you wanted to, again, use the contrast method here, you could shade them down with something like Gorgrunta's Fur, thinned down quite heavily, which is going to allow you a nice smooth color of them. Because we want this club nice and dark and aged, we're not going to bother edge highlighting the cords or the chain anyway. We want them dark and dank, and it's just a tree trunk wrapped around in chains. The chains, you can also decide, if you so wanted to use rusting mechanics by using Citadel's Ryza Rust Technical Paint, which is going to give you a nice orange rust color to go over the metals. If not, you can also use weathering pigments from Green Stuff World, or so on and so on. Anything of what you choose. So let's get these cords done as well, and we're going to get those done in a nice dark brown. Okay, and with that, our club of the Warstomper Mega Gargan is done. So if you wanted to take this one step further, you can apply your rusting effects if you so choose. You can also do a small edge highlight on the metallics of something like Runefang Steel. And the same thing with the cords. If you want the cords to pop a little bit more and be a little bit more fresh looking, go back over the original base coat of, in this case, Zandri dust, and then maybe do a smaller edge highlight in locations with something like Karak stone. Personally, I like this very dark, very aged look to my club. I don't believe the Gargants would personally be cleaning their equipment or replacing their equipment that much. If it's broke, they grab something else nearby. So with that, I want to thank you all for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the weekend, and I hope you guys take it nice and easy and stay safe out there.